In the mid-18th century, the 13 American colonies were a study in diversity, yet they were anchored by a shared identity. Walking through these ports, you'd find a population that viewed themselves as loyal, proud British subjects. They lived in an egalitarian society, where land ownership was common, a stark contrast to the rigid, hereditary hierarchies of Europe. For decades, that British identity was reinforced by a common enemy. To the north and west, the French Empire loomed as a constant military threat. But the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763 saw the British decisively remove the French from the map. This victory created a strategic irony. For generations, the colonies relied on the British military for their very survival. Now, with the French threat gone, that dependence vanished. The frontier was suddenly open, and the primary reason for accepting strict royal authority had disappeared. Britain's greatest military achievement on the continent had an unintended side effect. It removed the security crisis that served as the glue keeping the American colonies tethered to the crown. Wars are incredibly expensive, and this chart shows the cost of victory. After 1763, the British national debt climbed to levels that threatened the stability of the entire empire. King George III looked at his global holdings and saw that his American subjects paid a fraction of the taxes required in London. The British government turned to the principles of mercantilism to solve the crisis. They viewed the colonies as a resource to be managed for the financial health of the mother country. This meant moving away from decades of limited interference and toward a policy of squeezing the colonies for revenue. What looked like rational bookkeeping in London felt like an assault in the colonies. Britain's attempt to financially stabilize its empire became the exact mechanism that alienated its most profitable subjects. In 1765, Parliament's Stamp Act required a physical stamp, like the one seen here, on nearly every piece of colonial paper. The financial cost was minimal, but the political cost was massive. Colonists weren't protesting a few pennies, they were protesting the precedent. If Parliament could tax their daily business without their consent, it signaled that they no longer possessed the legal rights of British citizens. James Otis launched an intellectual counterattack that resonated across the 13 colonies. He argued that since the colonists had no seats in the British Parliament, that body had no legal authority to tax them. His rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," directly challenged the Crown's right to rule. A dispute over everyday paper goods had evolved into a debate over the legal definition of liberty, forcing the colonists to ask if they were truly citizens of the empire or merely its subjects. These abstract debates soon turned physical. By 1770, the presence of British troops in colonial cities reached a breaking point. On a Boston cobblestone street, a tense standoff between soldiers and a civilian crowd erupted into gunfire, leaving 5 dead in the Boston Massacre. Tensions surged again in 1773 in a calculated strike against a British corporate monopoly. Activists boarded ships in Boston Harbor and destroyed 300 crates of tea. The Boston Tea Party was a direct economic challenge to royal authority. Britain's response was swift and punitive. They closed the port of Boston, starving the city's economy, and placed Massachusetts under military control. Parliament intended to isolate Massachusetts and terrify the other colonies into obedience. Instead, the harsh punishment unified 13 distinct colonies against a common enemy. Even as war began, many colonists still hesitated to break their ties with the king. That psychological gap was bridged in 1776 by Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense. It spoke directly to the public, arguing that hereditary monarchy violated human reason. He pointed out the absurdity of an island 3,000 miles away attempting to rule a vast continent, arguing that the time for reconciliation had passed. This shift in public sentiment led to the formal severing of ties on July 4, 1776. The Declaration of Independence claimed all men possess unalienable rights. Pairing universal philosophical ideals with a specific list of grievances, it changed the objective of the war. It was no longer just a tax rebellion, it was the birth of a political system rooted in the consent of the governed. But declaring independence was not the same as achieving it. The Americans were outmatched by the British military and only survived by turning the conflict into a global struggle. They secured critical alliances with France and Spain, eager to fracture the British Empire. The war ended at Yorktown in 1781, where a combined American and French force trapped the British Army. The intellectual framework of the revolution was finally secured through the leverage of global geopolitical warfare. The new United States was a radical departure from the Old World. It was a republic without a monarch, built on a written constitution and a federalist structure. This diagram shows how the founders attempted to balance power across three separate branches, ensuring that no single pillar of government could become absolute. This new nation was born with a profound contradiction. The same egalitarian ideals that fueled the revolution explicitly excluded women, Native Americans, and enslaved Africans, hypocrisies that would haunt the country for centuries. Yet the existence of the United States proved a new reality to the world. It showed that a nation could be formed around an ideological premise rather than a royal bloodline. These ideas quickly crossed the Atlantic, reaching Europe at a moment of extreme internal fragility. In France, where the monarchy was already struggling with massive debt and social inequality, the success of the American experiment provided a working blueprint for a nation without a king. Returning soldiers brought more than just stories. They brought the practical evidence that a revolution against a crown could actually succeed. Britain, meanwhile, tightened its grip elsewhere. Shaken by the loss of the 13 colonies, the British government aggressively expanded its imperial control over India, determined to ensure that their remaining colonies remained strictly under the crown's thumb. The American Revolution did more than birth a single nation. It fractured the era of unchallenged colonialism and drew the ideological lines that would define